Hey everyone, it's Camper McDank here, and welcome to my video discussing Halo 3. It's been a long time coming, but the game has finally made its way onto PC, and I have been eagerly looking forward to this release. Because for me, out of all the Halo games that have been released throughout the years, Halo 3 is easily the most played game for me out of all of them. Released back on September 25th, 2007, being developed by Bungie and being published by Microsoft, Halo 3 was the game that really got me interacting with a lot of folks online. Yeah, I know it sounds kind of silly to say today, given that the online landscape finds itself with a lot of individuals that would yell absurdities at each other, but for me I didn't find that all too much when playing Halo 3 at the time, and instead ended up playing with some of the individuals who were in some of the multiplayer games that I found myself in. This was the game to introduce me to some of the friends that I still hang out with even today, so that's gotta mean something, right? This game, along with Halo Reach, were the games that most of my friends found myself playing the most, as well as being their first entry into the Halo series. But looking at Halo 3 specifically, how well does it hold up? And does it hold the title that some have for the game as being one of the best video games to ever be released? Well, let's find out now. As a warning for anyone that is new to my channel, I cover games in full, so if you have not played the game in any capacity whatsoever and want to go in with a fresh set of eyes, so to speak, then stop watching now and go play Halo 3 and then come back for my overall thoughts on the game. With all of that said, let's go ahead and finish the fight with Halo 3. Let's go ahead and start off by talking about the campaign for Halo 3, which showcases the Master Chief falling from space with a narration provided by Cortana. The narration actually showcases that Cortana actually had a choice when choosing a Spartan to be their companion of sorts. After Chief lands on Earth, with his location being in East Africa, a group of UNSC led by Johnson find the Chief but believe that the landing may have done him in. But before any action could take place, Chief ends up stumbling up, with Johnson wondering where Cortana is, with the Chief stating that she stayed behind on High Charity, which, if you remember from the Halo 2 video, High Charity was completely overrun by the Flood, which is a big uh-oh given the fact that Cortana has been stuck there with the Grave Mine for quite some time. Before anything can occur, however, the Chief notices a Covenant elite trying to sneak up on them and immediately attempts to blow his head off, with Johnson stating that it's the Arbiter, the elite from the last game who went through quite a bit, and is on their side along with the elites, and the Chief lowers his guard and then they make their way to where they'll get picked up for extraction. However, things don't go well and their extraction ends up getting pooped on by some Banshees. Don't you just hate that when it happens? Johnson ends up getting kidnapped, and after saving him along with a few other UNSC, a Pelican comes on down and clears out all the remaining enemies and phantoms that were putting pressure on the Chief and the others. After getting picked up, they are taken to a UNSC outpost where they are greeted by Miranda Keyes, who is now voiced by Justice Bolding instead of Julie Benz. They end up making their way further into the outpost only to be contacted by Lord Hood, where they discuss a plan to finally stop the Covenant leader, which is the Prophet of Truth. But in the midst of their conversation, the power ends up being cut out and Truth intercepts their line, basically saying that they will be enveloped by the rings and that he's pretty much God's hand. Fairly religious and in your face about it. A little odd given how he essentially acted back in Halo 2, when he was kind of in the shadows. But I guess when you're the only prophet around, you build up an ego over time? I don't know, you can make your own assessment on this change. That's just how I look at it. Either way, Miranda makes a statement that they're about to get invaded by the Covenant and wants the wounded to be evacuated out of there. After clearing out some of the Covenant, the Chief heads back to the main room and takes notice of a bomb that Miranda has left behind and wants to use to blow up the entire outpost, taking out any and all remaining Covenant that are still present there. After rescuing some Marines that were held prisoner by the Brutes and having to rearm the bombs since that ended up being overrun and taken over, the Chief makes it down an elevator near the hangar and nearly escapes the explosion. After awakening from the explosion, the Chief is then tasked with leading the Marines out of the base and proceeds to the town of Void through the Salvo Highway to defend the city from the Covenant invasion, as well as to stop the Covenant from uncovering a Forerunner artifact. The Chief, shortly after dealing with some of the anti-air raids and anti-air weaponry, allows Lord Hood and his ships to fight against Truth, but not too long after this, Truth activates the artifact, which creates a slip-space portal, and then heads right into it shortly after. A ship appears not too long and crash lands nearby, with the Arbiter wondering if it's just more brutes, with the Chief stating that it is much worse. This ends up being the Flood, which were on the ship that crash landed nearby, and not too long after this, they begin infecting everyone in the city. Not only do the Chief and the Arbiter get the aid of the elites that will help them eradicate the infestation, but they also learn that Cortana is on the ship, with the Chief making his way to where it landed. When Chief makes it inside the ship, Cortana appears but shortly cuts out after speaking only briefly. Out of nowhere, 343 Guilty Spark appears attempting to take Cortana, with the Chief not allowing him to take hold of her. Guilty Spark talks about the events that happened in the past with how Cortana had the activation index and how they were going to destroy the first Halo ring, which they ended up doing. But since the ring is gone, Guilty Spark no longer has a purpose, but proclaims to wanting to help the Chief in his efforts. Can I just say the last thing I would ever want to trust would be this robot, simply because of what he attempted to do and what he said back in Combat Evolved? Like, the thing was ready to destroy everything, and I'm surprised Chief decided to work with him even after all of that. Either way, the two make it up to where the elites are within the ship, along with Shipmaster being present. The message Cortana left behind ends up being repaired thanks to Guilty Spark, and Cortana states how High Charity is making its way to Earth and that there is an army of Flood within it. She also mentions that there is a solution through the portal to stop the Flood without needing to fire all of the remaining Halo rings. But unfortunately, the message ends not too long after this. The elites come to the consensus that they will head through the portal and take down the Brutes and Truth, with Lord Hood wanting to stay back at Earth. Shipmaster as well as Miranda claim that they should just head through the portal and find out for sure if there is a solution. Despite this, Lord Hood contemplates on whether or not they should, with the Chief butting in and stating that he will head through the portal and find Cortana's solution. Lord Hood asks the Chief if he trusts Cortana that much, with the Chief stating that he does. What follows is one of my favorite cutscenes in the game, with the elites and humans working together, the two sides not really being cool with the idea, but realizing that they have to if they want to stop Truth and the Flood. It's such a good cutscene, and god damn it, I love it to death. After they travel through the portal, they come across a hologram depicting a structure known as the Ark. The Ark's purpose being that it will allow Truth to be able to fire off all the Halo rings remotely from there. Not only that, but Truth has ended up activating a barrier to keep those of the humans, elites, and the Flood out from where it is held. And so from here on out, 3 groups are made up to disable the 3 barrier towers, with Johnson and his squad assigned to one tower, the Arbiter and the elites assigned to another, and the Chief and some UNSC assigned to help the Chief out. The Chief ends up disabling the first tower, with the elites disabling the second tower shortly afterwards. Johnson's team, on the other hand, ends up struggling to disable the third tower because of some reinforcements that arrived. Miranda then tasks the Chief and the Arbiter to go to the third tower and deactivate it as quickly as possible. Once they make their way and deal with the Brutes guarding the tower, Chief deactivates the barrier, but then as Shipmaster makes his way to the Ark, High Charity ends up appearing right before them, damaging the Shipmaster's vessel, with it bringing the Flood. Ooh, that's not good. After fighting their way through the Flood, the Chief ends up taking some heavy armor and making his way to the Ark, dealing with everything being thrown at him, including 2 scarabs. I mean, damn, going all out, aren't we, Truth? After dealing with all of that, the Chief and the Arbiter make their way inside and find that Johnson has been captured by the Prophet of Truth, with Truth forcing Johnson to activating all of the Halo rings. However, just before his hand is forced to start firing off the rings, Miranda swoops in with a Pelican making an entrance. She approaches Johnson and tells him that they're getting out of there, with Johnson basically telling her to leave while she can. Truth comments on how Miranda won't be able to take out all of the Brutes, with Miranda making a decision on whether or not to kill Johnson and potentially herself, with Truth coming in and killing her outright with spiker needles to the back. Johnson, who is taken aback by Miranda's death, ends up being forced to activate the Halo rings, with the Chief and the Arbiter inching closer and closer to where they are. However, before they fight their way there to where Truth and Johnson are, the Flood approaches them and offers their assistance, which, if I'll be honest, is kind of insane to see happen. The last thing I would ever expect to be that we would be allying with the Flood in any capacity, and while it isn't for very long granted, it's still pretty unexpected, and in a good way, of course. Anyways, the Chief and the Arbiter make their way to where the Prophet of Truth is, with the Arbiter confronting a now infected Truth. After some pretty badass spoken words from the Arbiter, Chief ends up deactivating the Halo rings from firing, and the Arbiter stabs Truth with an energy sword going right through him. Johnson carries the now deceased Miranda Keyes into the Pelican, and not too long after this, the Gravemind emerges from below, with the Chief and the Arbiter grabbing onto the Pelican, but unfortunately being knocked back down to the ground, where they now need to escape the Flood. After they make their way down a shaft of sorts, Chief notices Cortana sort of leading him somewhere, and where she ends up taking him is to where the Ark is shown, building another Halo ring because of the Chief's actions in the first game. Guilty Spark, knowing for a while after the Chief asks him about it, wonders what he'll do with this ring, to which he tells Guilty Spark that he will light it. The reason being is that it would destroy the flood infestation that is on the Ark, while protecting the galaxy at large from the destruction. The Arbiter wonders how he will light it, and that is by finding Cortana as she holds the index for activating the Halo ring. The Chief makes his way to High Charity to find Cortana, which, needless to say, High Charity has seen better days. After going through some admittedly creepy moments thanks to hearing the voices of that of the Gravemind and Cortana,
Child of my enemy, why have you come? I offer no forgiveness. The father's sins pass to his son.
Collection of lies. That's all I am. Stolen thoughts and memories.
I have walked the edge of the abyss. I have seen your future, and I have learned.
Submit! End her torment and my own!
This is UNSC AI serial number CTN 0452-9. I am a monument to all your sins.
the Chief fights his way to where Cortana is located. After breaking a barrier of sorts, Cortana states how she is broken, with the Chief following up on how he made a promise to her back in Halo 2 that he would come back for her after dealing with Truth. He asks her if she still has the index from the first Halo ring, to which she still does. Chief takes Cortana with her, and they set off an explosion sequence, which ends up destroying that of High Charity. And their methods of escape, you might be asking? Well, there was a Pelican that landed on High Charity. They get out of High Charity in the nick of time, and the Chief and the Arbiter make their way to where the control room is on the ring, being aided by Johnson in their efforts. But before they can make their way up and into the control room, flood dispersal pods are dropped all around them, showcasing that the flood are still indeed around them, even after the destruction of High Charity. They meet up together at this point and head inside the structure. Johnson asks the Chief for Cortana as he doesn't want to lose her as well. He makes his way to activate the ring while being joined by Guilty Spark, who is overjoyed for them wanting to fire the Halo ring. Though Guilty Spark mentions how the ring will be able to fire in just a few more days, and that Johnson expresses that they are running out of time, with Guilty Spark stating that a premature fire will destroy the Ark, with Johnson just saying to deal with it. Guilty Spark, being taken aback by his words and becoming increasingly frustrated, fires a beam at Johnson, which gravely wounds him. Not only that, but he fires a beam at the Arbiter and the Chief, bringing them down to their knees. Guilty Spark expresses that the ring is his, and at this point the Chief and Guilty Spark duke it out. Johnson fires off his Spartan laser at Guilty Spark and gives the weapon to the Chief to take out Guilty Spark, to which he does so in a short amount of time.
My eye! You never know how to destroy you! I am! Oh my lord!
Chief expresses that he will get him out of there and is denied, as Johnson just wants to be set off with a bang and passes away shortly after. Chief at this point takes Cortana off of Johnson and activates the Halo ring. With everything falling apart all around them, the Chief and the Arbiter make their way out of the structure and head off in a way to escape the destruction of the ring, and also find Johnson's Warhog. The two drive off and avoid the destruction of the ring to where Johnson's frigate had landed and make their escape, though the force of Halo's blast causes the slipspace portal to collapse, which only carries the front half of the frigate, bringing the Arbiter back to Earth. A memorial service is held for those who had fallen throughout the war, with the Arbiter and Lord Hood exchanging a few words regarding the Master Chief, who they believed has deceased. After the memorial service comes to a close, the Arbiter and his race depart for their home planet, and we are shown the rear end of the frigate, which is seen drifting in space. We are shown that the Chief and Cortana are actually still alive, with Cortana setting up a distress beacon, but stating how it may be years before they come into contact with anyone. Chief then decides to go into a cryo chamber, with Cortana telling the Chief that she will miss him, with Chief telling her to wake him when she needs him. We are then shown an unknown planet in the distance, which is where we will get to talking about when Halo 4 comes to PC. And that, everyone, is Halo 3's story, and what are my thoughts on Bungie's finale to finishing this fight? I think they did a pretty good job. The stakes are clearly much higher than in the previous games, with humans teaming up with the elites to stop the real threat at large, that being Truth and the Flood. Cortana and the Master Chief's relationship is also highlighted much more here, showing just how much he cares about her even when it seems like everyone is against the idea of wanting to find her solution as well as putting any real trust in her. The way he expresses his concern through body language when the message that Cortana had left behind showcases that she is in pain is perfect. No words are needed to convey that he truly does care about her. And when questioned about whether or not the Chief's trust is true in Cortana, he doesn't even hesitate in the slightest, as he just says, "Sir, yes sir." Especially when the Chief finds Cortana, he expresses that he made a promise and it was clear that there were no signs in any capacity that he was willing to break that promise. Even at the end of the game, when Chief is going into cryo sleep, Cortana tells him that she's gonna miss him, because who knows how long it'll be before she truly needs him, and the Chief just expresses to her to wake him when she needs him. It's great stuff, and it feels natural over the course of these games to see them at this point in their relationship. And speaking of Cortana, man, Gravemind really messed her up, huh? Like throughout the level in which you search through High Charity for her, she's just completely losing it. It's easily one of the darker / creepier moments in the Halo series, just seeing Cortana break down like this. Honestly, that entire level was just unnerving all around to go through. Oh man, but can we get a rip in chat for our boy Johnson, a wonderful character in the Halo universe right to the end. An absolute badass that while he may have found himself getting captured often, he still shines through as being a pretty witty character at times, or just showcasing just how much he ain't messing around. Seeing his death definitely hurt me for sure, and it's all because of the fact that Guilty Spark couldn't just wait a few more days, so he goes into a hissy fit and just starts firing off at people. And unfortunately, it took Johnson's life in the process. When he wanted to be sent off with a bang, I say that he got this and then some. Miranda also had an unfortunate death, but with regards to some of her dialogue lines and actions, they kinda came off as odd. Like think back to when Chief and the Arbiter arrived at the UNSC outpost, and right after Truth intercepts their call to Lord Hood, one of the UNSC asks Miranda for a rally point for where the troops should go, and she just states, "to war." That isn't exactly saying where to go at all, and it just comes off as a silly statement. And then the part where Miranda flies in to save Johnson when he is captured by Truth, personally, I sat there and wondered why she only came in alone and not with other UNSC at her side. Did she think she was going to catch them all off guard long enough to save Johnson and kill them all? It seemed to be an oddball decision made that ended up costing her life in the end in an unnecessary fashion. If there is a reason for her coming alone, that I wouldn't mind hearing it in the comments section if I missed something, but it didn't seem like I did. The Arbiter, I still think, is an awesome character here, but he definitely feels like a side character rather than a main character back in Halo 2. I do like the fact that he does get some closure with him taking out Truth in an awesome sequence, but I wish, much like in Halo 2, you ended up switching between perspectives with the Arbiter to get his view on the situation. I love the Arbiter, but I like the way in which he was handled in Halo 2 a bit more, simply because the Arbiter gave you a view on how the Covenant operated and what their ideologies were through the various interactions that had occurred throughout his campaign. He felt like a main character there, where here he feels more like a side character. The Chief? Well, he's still an awesome, badass super soldier that can still fight any and all encounters with little to no issues. He still has his great one-liners and is mostly silent throughout the game. He's still the Chief you know and love, and that's a good thing. Something that I didn't mention in my campaign summary is that occasionally throughout the game, there are moments where Cortana will end up speaking to you at various points, and she will say some interesting stuff, at the very least.
Could you sacrifice me to complete your mission? Could you watch me die? You have been called upon to serve. This place will become your home. This place will become your tomb.
Now, while I think these moments definitely showcase a side of Cortana that depicts that something is definitely up with her and is a different approach to telling the story, these can slow the progression of a level down to a crawl. The level titled Cortana is easily the worst with this, having to constantly come to a crawl at almost every other minute, just to listen to her talk, as well as the Gravemind. Don't get me wrong, it doesn't happen at every waking second in the other levels, but when it does happen, I just get a little annoyed at times. The campaign definitely houses some seriously great moments though, like when the forward unto dawn just lands above you and drops off a plethora of scorpion tanks for you to go to town with, and it's genuinely an epic experience. And also seeing the Flood's first appearance with regards to Halo 3's campaign, and just showcasing how fast it can spread is without a doubt a bone-chilling experience to say at the very least. And of course, who couldn't forget the final moments of the campaign, where you're driving your way to where the frigate is and seeing everything blowing up all around you. Halo CE had a similar ordeal, but when comparing that of Halo CE's and Halo 3's final moments, I very much enjoy running this level with the sheer intensity of everything happening. Overall, Halo 3's story was a fight that we finally ended up winning, but not without some losses along the way. Halo 3's gameplay is by and large the same as Halo 2. You've got pretty much all of the weapons from the first Halo games, and yes, that means they brought back the good old assault rifle. And you can still dual wield a large number of weapons to dish out some serious pain. Now I want to bring up some things that I forgot to mention in my Halo 2 video, and that would be two enemy types that I forgot to talk about. The first one is the Brutes. These guys will try to go toe to toe with you on multiple occasions with you, and back in Halo 2, they would go into full on rage mode and basically beat the shit out of you. In Halo 3, since you aren't fighting the elites, the Brutes kind of serve to take their place, and their rage mode is much more subdued than in the previous game, which I'm fine with since they went straight up bonkers and basically punted you around the room a good bit. The noob combo works pretty well on them as a result, that being charging up a plasma pistol and firing like a Covenant carbine or a battle rifle at them, though you can use a lot of different weapons on them and still get some good results in the end. The other enemy type I forgot to mention would be the drones, and these bastards back in Halo 2 were brutal. Let's just say if you were to play Halo 2 on Legendary, these guys were absolutely devastating as all hell. Then again, everything on Halo 2 on Legendary was basically almost impossible, but oh well, what can you do? Even worse is that in Halo 3 they come at you in much larger numbers than in Halo 2, and they can still pack quite a punch to say at the very least. Despite that, they feel like they don't take all that much punishment to go down, and can be taken out with most weapons. Use something like dual-wielded plasma rifles, or I guess even the Brute Shot if they're all clustered up together, and you'll take them out in no time. Okay, since we're on the topic of enemies, why don't we go ahead and talk about some of the new enemies that were introduced in Halo 3. Oddly enough, the only real new enemy types that you fight pertain to that of the Flood, and we got a few new forms to talk about here. The first one is the Stalker form, and these lads can run quite fast and jump great distances. They can move about the environment with ease and will generally try to zoom in on where you are to get a solid hit on you. I'd honestly have a close range weapon like an energy sword or shotgun when dealing with them at close range, or if you see them running off, a precision weapon like the battle rifle or Covenant carbine is alright, but you've got a fair amount of options to combat against them with. Then we've got the ranged form, which, oh man, do I hate dealing with this form. They've got some insane range, and their accuracy is deadly accurate. Not only that, but if it finds itself taking too much damage, then it will shield its weak point, taking less damage as a result. I hate dealing with them on Legendary because if you find yourself getting shot from afar from one of these guys, then you'll die within close to seconds, as like I said, they have insane accuracy and they rarely miss. If you're unable to find cover, then you're basically boned. The best and honest to god method to taking these bastards out is with the dual wield plasma rifle combo, as it will shred through them with little to no fuss. I'd say out of all the enemies to fight in this game, these guys will give you the most trouble, especially on Legendary. The last form to talk about is the tank form, and there are only a few things it can do, which is to output some pretty hefty melee damage, as well as having the ability to reproduce infection forms. Honestly, out of all the Flood forms, the one that is the easiest to take down, if you were to ask me, is the tank form. Just get a Brute Shot or energy sword and they go down with like one melee hit to the face. But yeah, on the whole, that's pretty much it for enemies. So let's go on ahead and move over to the new weapons as well as the equipment that were brought to the table with Halo 3. Now, as I said, pretty much all of the weapons from Halo CE and Halo 2 are in this game, and one of the first new additions is the Spiker. The Spiker fires out some deadly spikes while also having a pretty fast reload time. It can also be dual-wielded for some extra carnage, while also having an increased melee damage thanks to the blade attached to it. I like the Spiker, and I think it's best represented here in Halo 3, with having solid damage all around. The best way I find myself using the Spiker is shooting someone for a good bit and then finishing them off with a solid melee hit. A neat addition, all things considered. Next up we have the Mauler, and this acts kinda like a short-range shotgun which can be dual-wielded. I think it's pretty alright, but I don't use it all too much. But the fact that you can dual-wield it makes it, I feel, a bit better and I think it does a better job than the shotgun if you were to ask me. But it's a decent addition to the sandbox of weapons. The next one is the gravity hammer. Think of it similar to that of the energy sword by having much more destruction to the environment. It's fun to mess around with and go nuts with, and I think it's a great weapon to use, but I don't know, I think I would rather pick up the energy sword more, but you do you, fam. Then we've got the Spartan laser, which requires a charge up to fire off, but when it hits an enemy, it's gonna kill them outright in one hit. Most vehicles blow up with only one hit, the only exception being that of the heavier duty vehicles like the Scorpion and the Wraith. It's a really powerful weapon that, when used with the right timing, it can land you free kills. Another new addition to the sandbox would be how the turrets that you can utilize in the campaign missions, as well as in the multiplayer, can be ripped off their stand and carried around as a weapon. These can be devastating weapons, but do note your movement speed is cut down quite a bit, so if you find yourself getting caught out, it's kinda tricky to get yourself out of situations like that, so do be mindful when wanting to use turrets as weapons. And lastly, for new weapons is the flamethrower. Much like with the turrets, the flamethrower is considered a heavy weapon and will slow you down when carried around, but it's certainly a strong weapon with unfortunately not that much range. If you find yourself with one, stick close to corridors or areas where you can get the jump on someone, or else you won't find much use for it otherwise. And that's about it for the new weapons. There aren't too many new weapons, which I assume the developers must have found themselves having a bit of trouble coming up with brand new weapons for the sandbox. If anything, I can respect them wanting to make sure that each weapon is different from each other, and that there aren't redundant weapons on offer. But that's not everything, of course, as we have a new addition to the sandbox, and that comes in the form of equipment. These tools are to provide a new way to spice up combat in a number of ways, and we're going to be talking about all the pieces of equipment. First, let's talk the equipment that can be found within the campaign, with the first one on the lineup being the auto turret. This is a rather average turret that you can throw out to help cover weak points. It's alright for me, and I didn't find myself using it all too much in the campaign, save for the last level, where you need to hold out against the flood, but that's about it. Next up is invincibility, which is pretty obvious as to why it's not in the multiplayer. You become invincible for a brief period of time and can take any and all damage with no consequences to your health. It's fun to use when you just want to turn off your brain for a good bit, but it is rare, so do make use of it in situations where you know it'll count. Lastly, we have Cloak, which is exactly what it sounds like. You become invisible for a brief period of time, allowing you to sneak past enemies and take them out without being noticed. Much like with invincibility, it's for a brief period of time, so it's best to find situations to make complete use of it. Now for everything else. First, we have the bubble shield. This creates a dome-shaped shield that blocks incoming fire and explosives inside or behind it, though vehicles and individuals can still go right through it. It's a great way to sight to someone shooting at you and force them to make a decision if they still want to pursue you by going into the dome with you, or to back off and find someone else to mess up. Then we have the Gravlith, which allows you to reach higher areas in the map, and this can be great if you're trying to take another route to kill someone, or you just want to be able to navigate in a different manner around the environment. It's a really fun piece of equipment to use when you want to be a little more creative. Next is the deployable cover. It's a plasma shield that can protect you from oncoming fire for a brief period of time. Keep in mind this can break, so once it visually becomes orange from gunfire, you'll need to find a way to move on to find a better position. It's not too bad to use for cover, but I don't know, seeing as it can be taken out in seconds, it can be hard to use at times. The flare is similar to that of a flashbang, where when thrown out, the closer you are to it, the more blinded you become from it. This can be good in multiplayer, but it's completely useless in the campaign, as it doesn't affect the AI at all. Just avoid it in the campaign, and it's got some good use in the multiplayer as a way to get the upper hand on someone. The power drain is up next, and this one is deadly. Basically, when thrown out, anyone caught in the vicinity of it will lose their shields in mere seconds and be left wide open to precision weapons and snipers. It weakens you outright and can turn the tides of fights in seconds if things aren't going your way. Easily, without a doubt in my mind, one of the strongest pieces of equipment that you can find. After that, we have the radar jammer, and it's basically a way to mislead folks into thinking there are enemies nearby when there aren't any at all. Much like with the flare, it's basically useless in the campaign, but it can have its uses in the multiplayer when you want to throw people in a loop. Overall, not too bad. The regenerator is another great piece of equipment. Once thrown out, it will regen shields for those who are in it. It's another great way to get yourself out of a pretty rough spot and to get the upper hand on someone who's already got a few shots on you and to turn the tides in a fight. It's great in both the campaign and in the multiplayer, though do take note it can heal enemy players in multiplayer, so don't let them get that advantage if they end up taking you out. And lastly, we have the trip mine, and this one can be a lot of fun to use. Take for example, you got a warhog that's filled with people in it, and they are trying to chase you down and are ready to run you over. Throw down that trip mine just before they come into contact with you, and you've earned yourself a triple kill. It's a great gotcha moment to those who wanted to kill a lowly Spartan who is out and about minding his or her own business.
With the talk of equipment and weapons out of the way, why don't we go ahead and look at some of the new vehicles for Halo 3. First up, we got the Prowler, and this is similar to that of the Warhog in that it can carry a number of infantry around, as well as having a turret mounted onto it for some solid damage, which of course needs to be manned. It's not too bad to drive around, and it looks pretty menacing, so hey, I'm down utilizing it. Then we got the Chopper, and I'm kinda half and half on it. The damage on it is pretty nice, and it does have some serious ramming capabilities when coming into contact with other vehicles, but driving around in it and trying to fire it at enemies isn't that much fun. I don't know, maybe I just suck big pee-pee, but what can you do? Now for the UNSC vehicles. You've got the Mongoose, which can carry 2 people around at a time, but it isn't able to fire any kind of projectile, so it's purely just for transportation. It definitely is fun to drive around, and especially if you've got someone on the back using a rocket launcher or a fuel rod gun, it can easily be a great time. Then we've got the Hornet, which is an aircraft vehicle that is capable of carrying 2 passengers along being able to fire mounted guns as well as rockets, which makes it quite a threat in the skies. It's genuinely a great vehicle that can be devastating unless someone has the means to take it out of the skies. Then you've got the Elephant, which is by far the biggest vehicle in the entire game, as it can carry around a large sum of individuals. This was without a doubt the vehicle that if you and your friends were playing on a map with this featured in it, you would be dicking around in it for a majority of the match. Slow as all hell, but it sure was a ton of fun to mess around in. And that's about it. Everything except the Spectre returns here for Halo 3, and needless to say, you've got quite the variety when it comes to vehicles this time around. One of the new additions that was added with Halo 3 would be that of the terminals, which are ways to gain some perspective on the history of the Forerunners. These of course can only be found within the campaign. It's something that isn't at all mandatory for you to understand Halo 3's story whatsoever, as these are there for those that decide to go off the beaten path and end up being rewarded with good old knowledge. I like these, as it's just something that added more to the Halo universe, and these weren't terribly long to read through. Personally, I'd say go on the hunt for these. An addition that I did forget to talk about when it comes to what Halo 2 brought to the table was the skulls. Man, I gotta take better notes next time. With each level in the game, there would be a hidden skull that could be found if the player did some thorough searching within each of the levels. These skulls could be turned on to alter aspects of the game, like making it more challenging or a way to have more fun. For example, the Skull of Thunderstorm makes it where it promotes all enemies to the highest available ranks, meaning more damaging weapons and better resistances. Basically, if you thought the game was piss easy in any capacity, even on the highest difficulty setting, you can make the game even harder with some of these skulls. And then you have skulls like Grunt Birthday Party, where every time you kill a grunt in the game, only working when a shot is made to the head, the grunt will explode into birthday confetti. I used to love this skull back then, but after doing a lot of Halo Reach Firefight, I ended up getting sick of it. Now, I want to transition to talking about Halo 3's level design when it comes to the campaign, as I feel there is a fair bit to say on it. I just want to get this out of the way. When it comes to the overall design of Halo 3's campaign, I think that it does a much better job than what Halo 2's ended up turning out. The levels themselves provide a plethora of ways in which you can tackle enemy encounters, whether that be through providing equipment for you to pick up, as well as providing multiple paths for you to approach combat in. You can always go in for the full frontal assault, or you can take a stealthier approach, allowing you to get the jump on enemies. It also helps that, especially when you play on Legendary, everything is bumped up in just the right margins, without it being overly punishing back in Halo 2, where if you simply peeked around a corner, you'd be destroyed in mere seconds. I'd say as long as you know what you're doing, you can easily get through gunfights without too much of a hitch. The levels also aren't corridors all day, as they are expanded much more here, being similar to that of Halo Combat Evolved, with a number of options at your disposal. Now, I'd say that by and large, going through the campaign is less tedious over Halo 2, but it still has those missions that can throw a curveball at points. For me, it was a certain section in Savo Highway, where you were dealing with brute choppers, wraiths, and just about everything, honestly. Vehicle sections will probably be the trickiest in terms of difficulty if you're going through on Legendary, but without a doubt in my mind, the hardest level in all of Halo 3 for me was the level titled Cortana. It's a full-on flood level, and the difficulty comes from the confusing level design at points and dealing with the flood range form that can be encountered in numbers, and when you're running through the level on Legendary, needless to say, be prepared to see your energy shields drop to nothing in the blink of an eye at times. Oh, and of course, being bombarded by the various combat forms probably doesn't help much either. The level is hard, and honestly, out of everything the campaign throws at you, this is where you may find yourself struggling at points the most. Though without a doubt in my mind, the campaign is definitely much more manageable here, and it's not all that bad. But yeah, overall, I think that the gunplay is still really solid, and the overall design of the game holds up very well so many years later. This Halo's multiplayer, out of all the other multiplayer components in every Halo game, was the one that I put some serious hours into.
Granted, I definitely wasn't someone who was playing hardcore at every waking second, but I was certainly throwing my hand in there from time to time. The hardcore playlist back on the original Halo 3 that I played with the most was certainly Team SWAT out of all of them. I mean, you had Lone Wolves, which was pretty much FFA or free-for-all, MLG Team Slayer, so on and so forth. But for me, I just really loved playing SWAT as it was always a really tense experience to make sure you got the first shot on someone. Again, wasn't exactly into the competitive scene back in the day as I pretty much just played with the friends I had at the time. Despite this, I remember Halo 3 being relatively solid with the multiplayer maps. The maps I find myself enjoying the most were the Pit, Guardian, which I believe were a lot of folks' favorite map, but don't quote me on that, and Narrows. Honestly, when it came to the overall quality of the multiplayer maps, I honestly enjoyed most if not all of them. In terms of the ones I personally didn't enjoy that much, well, I can't really think of any. I guess Snowbound wasn't that much fun, but I don't know. I guess you could say I just sort of rolled with it whenever it came up. Wasn't like anything that was a deal breaker. It could have been that I may not have spent that much time on the maps themselves, but none of them made me really outright hate them. Although, let's go ahead and mention the fact that Halo 3 would also introduce even more customization options to the Spartans and Elites that you could switch between. For Spartans, you had a multitude of armor sets that you could switch between, with aspects such as your helmet, shoulders, and body piece, allowing you to show off a bit more in the game. And it's pretty much a similar ordeal when mentioning Elites. And when it comes to talking about the different types of armor in the game, let's not forget the good old recon armor, which was quite unique as there were a multitude of ways for you to earn that set. It would be gifted to players that were able to do something quite notable, but later down the road, with the release of Halo 3 ODST, another way to unlock it would be by doing the Vidmaster challenges for both Halo 3 and Halo 3 ODST. Let's just say doing Vidmaster is no easy feat to say at the very least. The game modes here are by and large the same from the previous games. You've got Team Deathmatch, King of the Hill, Oddball, Capture the Flag, etc. However, the big one that saw its debut here out of all of the game modes was called Infection. This is where a small group of individuals are zombies and it's their job to infect everyone within the match and turn them into zombies. Let's just say Infection was without a doubt in my mind the go-to party game type to play when you had a large group of people together. What, you wanted to play big team battle? Well, sorry Bubba, we got some Infection to do. The maps, in which were created by Bungie, were great and had some fun moments, but now it's time we transition to over where another great addition to the Halo series made Infection 10 times better in the end. Yes folks, it's time we talk about Forge. Forge was introduced with the release of Halo 3, and starting out, the maps themselves didn't have much to tinker around with, though that didn't mean the community couldn't come up with some creative ideas to make some maps with. It wasn't until the first piece of DLC released, which gave us the maps Standoff, Rat's Nest, and Foundry. Out of all of the new maps, Foundry was the map that saw the most user-created maps being made within it. To give you an idea of what Forge is, it allows you to take the existing assets on a map to create something entirely new within the boundaries of the map itself. And with me bringing up Foundry, it was the map that the assets on there provided many different ways to create some really unique and different maps within. Forge was so big that in one of the later Halo games, Halo Reach, had an entire dedicated map to simply forging on it, but I'm getting way ahead of myself here. Forge was an aspect of the game that I spent countless hours on just creating maps and wanting to provide a ton of maps to play on, which was mostly just Infection maps. There was also a feature that was back on OG Halo 3, as since we were playing on MCC, this version doesn't have it unfortunately, and it was a system that was called File Share, which Bungie at the time would go out of their way to highlight some genuinely solid maps, clips, game types, and screenshots from the community. This was an awesome way to bring the community together by showing off some of the best work that was made by those to show off what they had done in the game. You can still look at other folks' file share on MCC, but there isn't a way to show the best of the best with what the community has made. Now, very rarely did I create maps around Deathmatch or Capture the Flag, but when it came to Infection maps, I was on point. Hell, the big names thrown around for maps and game modes that people played on often would be stuff like Jenga, Fat Kid, Smear the Queer, Ghostbusters, and some racing maps, and just so much more. Honestly, the level of creativity was out of this world within the community itself, and with the future Halo games, Forge mode would only be further expanded upon to give the community even more tools to work with. It's an addition to the game that without a doubt in my mind makes it one of my reasons to play Halo on top of everything else they provide. I was someone who was always being creative, and at points I'd find myself having some friends to test out my maps to be sure they wouldn't be able to crouch jump or grenade jump out of them. Yeah, it bugged me when they were able to get out of bounds multiple times, but they were being helpful, and if they somehow find these videos, I just want to thank you for the hours of time that was spent on helping me with my maps. Anyways, moving along, let's go ahead and talk about some good old graphics and music.
You know, for a game that came out in 2007, from a visual standpoint, I honestly think it's held up incredibly well over the years. The character models are packed with a solid level of detail, and animations across the board through character movements and weapon reloading is genuinely great. The lighting is also just wonderful. Take the first playable level in the game, Sierra 117, where you are in the jungle and are starting out. You can see the rays of sun shining through the various leaves on the trees, and I think it's just beautiful stuff to look at throughout the levels, and it's an aspect of detail that was really impressive at the time. There's this level of grit on everything that I can personally dig on the weapons and also with the environments themselves, giving it a rusted look on some of the weapons, and when it comes to mentioning the flood, they also got quite the shift from a visual standpoint, going from a fungal looking parasite to one that is more flesh and bone, and it's genuinely kinda gross. You want an example of how gross? Just look at High Charity. The fleshy exterior on everything within the city? I couldn't imagine the artists and what kind of research they had to do to create these environments. That had to have been nightmare fuel for days right there. And when it comes to music, I think you guys already know what I'm going to say about the music for Halo 3. Once more being composed by Marty O'Donnell and Michael Salvatori, they do an incredible job with the game's OST. We actually have quite a number of returning tracks from Halos 1 and 2, but obviously with some shakeups to make them feel fresh and exciting to listen to once again. There are some new tracks in here that are still great to listen to, but the soundtrack is still familiar enough that if you've been playing the Halo games up to this point, then you kinda know what you're getting yourself into here. But here are some of my favorites from the game itself. Halo's music has always presented very awe-inspiring moments throughout each game, and it gives them that extra oomph that they need and more. It's such a crucial part of the game that without it, it wouldn't be as memorable as it is today. Marty and Michael are truly great composers, and their work still shines so brightly even to this day with many folks, and honestly, who couldn't blame them? It's truly wonderful stuff. And that, everyone, is my Halo 3 video. To this day, Halo 3 is still loved by many, and it's easy to see why. It was the game that for me and my friends at the time played almost every day, and it was all that we mostly ever really did. Jumping on to dick around in the multiplayer, do some custom game carnage, or just create some maps through the Forge editor, there was something for everyone here. And while there are some that felt that Halo 3 didn't live up to the hype, I personally think that it did what it set out to do, and that was to give us a kick-ass campaign as well as providing us with a really solid and fun multiplayer component. The Forge mode was a wonderful addition to the game that still is treated as part of the core Halo package, and for good reason. It allows people to really show off their creativity to others and provide countless hours of fun. Alright everyone, that is going to be it for me. If you enjoyed this video, then please be sure to leave a like, and hey, maybe subscribe if you enjoy the type of content that I create here. The next video is feeling like another Zelda video, so I do hope you stick around for that when it does come out, but until then, stay safe out there everyone. Have a good morning, evening, or afternoon, and hopefully I'll catch you all back here next time.